Hello, welcome to Outbuilding. We have been working on this pedestal for a while. This is going to hold that big water tank. And it's part of our overall water supply system, which there's a playlist for if you want to see the other steps involved in getting to this point. Today, having put in a footing, put in the cinder block, and then grouted all these, I'm now going to put a cap on top of this that's going to sort of unify the whole thing, create some protection for it so that when it's in direct rain, it won't erode the cinder block, as often happens if you have it out in the rain. It'll also just hopefully add a nice cosmetic look to the whole thing. In the corners here, I'm going to embed the posts for the canopy that will be up above, which will partially protect this, but it will be exposed. So I'm going to get started today putting together forms for this. It's not a ton of concrete, but it will be sort of more finish work. And it's sort of like putting in a curb all the way around the top. We'll get started and see how it goes. I start with using the laser level here to just check kind of where what my basis is. And when I think when I did the groundwork, I was off by 1.5 inches with the backhoe when I first kind of set up the trench. And then with the footing, I was able to get that down to about 1/4 inch difference between the different corners. And then now with the block work in place, I'm down to less than 1/8 inch. So I'm in really good shape, and I can kind of just base my cap on the heights around this. And I'll make sure I'll level the brackets for the canopy above once more. The site I'm doing this work at is really remote and has no power, so I'm using solar panels and a little battery pack to sort of run the power tools and the mixer and the things I need. And this has proven to be really useful, something I'm looking forward to putting on top of the van eventually, but for now I'm just doing it with these hand panels and setting up the pack as I need it. I spent some time back at home in the shop to cut out the boards that I was going to use for these forms, and I trimmed up some really thin strips of wood, and then I glued and stapled those down onto the boards so that I had sort of a registration strip that I could set across the top of the wall. And I wanted that both to kind of keep it level, but also to kind of create a little bit of a trim element between the block work and what is going to look like a curb up above. And these were easy to prepare, and I just made them all 8 feet long, and I figured I'd cut them down once I got out here to the site. So there's an inner form wall and an outer form wall to this cap, and I decided to start with the inner form walls. And the dimensions are just over 8 feet, because since my boards are 8 feet, I used a little chamfer strip in the corners you'll see, but I had to trim the boards down to accommodate that. So I got these all measured and cut out and started preparing the inner walls. I test fit these to make sure they fit, and then I had to build sort of a strong back on them so they wouldn't bulge in when they had the weight of the concrete on them. And I think you call this a whaler. And it's a 2x4 set on its side, and I just been using a bunch of scrap wood from the footing forms, and so I kind of cobbled together a straight piece of that to create the strong back for this interior wall. And then I can stand that up with some 2x4 posts that you'll see that kind of hold it up at the right level. And I'm trying to make the inner wall about 1/4 inch taller than the outer wall, so that any water that gets on there won't pool on top. It'll roll off to the outside. So with that simple wall built, I kind of propped up one end of it and then held the other side over so that I could check my mark against a measurement I'd made and figure out how tall to make the leg so that I could build a little stand for each of these walls. And so then I marched around the box and built a wall on each side that followed the same process and created the interior walls with the corners left a little bit open to put in that chamfer strip that I'll show you next. So my little piece of chamfering goes down in there to match those two up in the corner. And I'm pushing in with my leg, and then I'll screw this together here. Here's another corner. So I'm having to really kind of jam it into the corner and then pin it together.
With the interior walls in place, then I moved over to bending down the rebar, and I just used one of the corner posts that I used in a previous video to set the block and to use that kind of as a bending bar, and used my impressive 150 pounds to push these down and bend them into submission so that I could create a bond beam around the rim. So here I've got the rebar set up, and I'm starting to measure and cut pieces that go, and I'm tucking them inside the brackets that are in the corner that will hold the beam posts for the canopy up above. And that way the bond beam and the concrete and everything that drops down in that corner will help anchor that post anchor in there. And then I'm going around and tying those up with each of the bent over rebars and rebending them so that they're horizontal, and tucking everything in so it's going to all fit inside the concrete when it's formed. The outer walls sit a little bit lower, and they use that trim strip that I put on in the shop to kind of anchor themselves on top of the wall, and that's part of the reason for those, was to get them to sort of register and hang on that lip. So I'm measuring these out, and since the wall on the outside is longer than 8 feet, I need to splice together 2 pieces to make that all fit together. I also need to trim out that corner because that trim strip in the corner kind of interferes with the next board. So for each end, once I got it measured out, I popped out a little piece of that so that they all nested together. I then test fit these, and they hang off on that little trim strip, and then I cleaned up the edge of the concrete if it needed to be, and then I could pin the corner in with a little strap over the top and a couple screws that held it all together. So I got all the forms built, and I was running out of time and energy for the day, so I loaded up the concrete, and I still had to kind of create some support for the brackets, so I wasn't quite ready, but I got close. So I loaded this stuff up before tucking things in for the night.
So yesterday putting this formwork in was a little bit of a fight, and I apologize for not doing as good a job of doing video of it, but I just kind of was running out of steam and time, and I was hoping to get it poured yesterday because I knew today was supposed to be a little bit kind of foggy and rainy this morning, and it is just that. But it is actually pretty nice, and the sun's trying to break through. The solar panels are picking up power and everything, so I think I'm pretty close, and it's supposed to get nicer today. So I've got a few little details to do before I get this done. I might revisit this if I ever did this again and do it slightly differently, because this was kind of challenging to get those things set up, but they're in place now, they're stable and everything, and I think the results are going to be pretty good. And my walls, it was nice to see, are pretty straight. They're straight, but they're just, the dimensions were just a little bit off, so it's just something to note when I do the foundation that I need to kind of measure as I go up and make sure that I'm staying on track. This was really pretty close. And probably fully, I mean, for a water pedestal, it's fine. For a foundation, you might want to get it a little bit closer. And I can adjust these brackets a little bit and make sure they're centered where they need to be. I'm going to build just a little holder for them so that they're in position where they need to be, and I'm not trying to fight with positioning them while I'm pouring the concrete. But I got a good day to work with today. I'll get this started and hopefully get this thing poured.
Positioning these post brackets ended up being sort of an arts and crafts project where I just needed everything to be sort of plumb, level, positioned properly, and then I pulled out the laser level one more time and set all the cups of the post brackets so that they're all at the exact same level, so that I didn't have to worry about that moving up from here when I start doing the framing. Since the only interconnection between the pedestal base here and the upper structure is these post brackets, all I really need to do is make sure that these are measured properly, square and level, and I can kind of disregard any discrepancies down below and move up from there. So I'm just double checking here to make sure everything's good, and I didn't need to reposition everything. Stuff is really pretty good. I'm just using canola oil as a form release on the raw plywood just to close up the pores a little bit so the concrete doesn't soak in, and hopefully the forms pop off a little bit more readily. A little bit of tidying up before I start putting in the concrete. I'm kind of making this up as I go, but I figure I don't want the concrete to sort of leak through that formwork that's pressed up against the side of the cinder block, because the cinder block's not completely flat. So I'm mixing up just a little paste of mortar mix, and I'm going to go around and just sort of chink the cracks around the formwork just so that I've got something sort of plugging those open holes, and hopefully keep some of the dripping from going down the face of the cinder block.
So I've gotten kind of used to concrete, but I still get kind of a little bit anxious about it because once you get started, you can't really stop, and I got to get all the way through it. And I've done as many sanity checks as I can. I've sort of sealed the edges. I've got the form release in there. Everything's straight. I double checked the measurements. Everything looks good. I did come up with one thing though as I was walking down to grab a shovel, and I was just about ready to start, and I realized that I've left a little bit of open space in each of these corners so that I could get the rebar situated around these brackets. And I didn't really account for that in my volume calculation for how much concrete I need. So I think this is going to take about 16 bags. I've got 18 bags, but I looked at each of these cores and I'm like, I'd hate to run out. That would be terrible to get towards the end and not have enough, because it's a fair drive to go get some. So I'm going to run and pick up 4 extra bags. I'll use it in the future, and it'll just be nice to have like an overage, and then I don't have to consider that when I'm going. It's also getting a little bit better weather as the day goes on, so I'm hoping that I can it's been just a little bit misty, and so hopefully it'll continue to improve. I'm going to run and grab those bags, and then I'll come back and ponder this on the drive and make sure I'm not missing anything else, but I'm getting close. So I went ahead and got more concrete, and I'm going to start now, and this is something that I'm just going to put on time lapse and run through. I think it was about 16 bags is what I calculated, but I got those extra pockets and I have 24 to work with, so I should have plenty. I'm going to be adding a couple things to this. I've got some basalt fibers, which they just look like hair, but I had those from a countertop project, and I'm going to use a little bit of those. I'll just put 1 jar of that in each bag I mix. And I've got some super plasticizer, which I think it's sort of like a water reducer in concrete. It makes it a little bit more plastic or flows a little bit better, and it'll get rid of the little air pockets and things. So I'm going to put a little bit of that. It calls for 3 to 5 ounces. And this is exactly that much. I don't know quite what it is, but it's less than, this is from a beer can. And so a normal can is 12 ounces, and this is probably something like 4 ounces. So I'll put a little bit of that in there for each of these bags. And then I've got some leftover Portland cement. I'll just throw a little bit in that, which will bump the PSI up just a little bit. The salt will help with any sort of little small cracks that form. The plasticizer will help it settle into pockets and not have any air bubbles in it. And the PSI, and cranking up the PSI is never going to hurt. So I'm going to switch to time lapse. I'll see how long it is. 5 minutes till 1. I'll see how long it takes me to get somewhere between 16 and 24 bags of concrete in, and then I can start working on the finish. All right, well, I needed half an extra bag, so I needed to get the extra concrete. I didn't need very much, but I needed some more. It's 3:45, so I'll do the math and figure out how long that took. It's a lot of work. The plasticizer does kind of a weird thing. It seems to, like, all the water drains out, And so it's dripping down. The places I sealed it are a little bit better off than the places I didn't seal it. I'm sure that'll kind of bleach out and go away. And then I'll be really curious to see how the top surface holds up, because it is kind of lost some of its fines. So it looks kind of nice. It's a different look. It looks like a little bit like kind of like power washed concrete. Hopefully it holds up real well. Time will tell once we get it cracked open. I'm going to clean up now and keep finishing up the little edges as I go, because it's sort of, I clocked my way around, and I've got a wet side and a dry side.
The next day, I decided to take advantage of my commute up to the project and pick up another load of the concrete that I'm breaking up and loading into the pedestals as just fill. The concrete is remnants of some fence posts that I'm pulling out from a defunct pasture, and I'm just breaking it up off the fence posts as I pull them out. Load up some tools and then head on up to see how the concrete looks when I pull the forms.
All right, well, I'm excited to look inside this thing. It's a little bit like making a cake and worrying about screwing up the icing, but it'll be fun to take this apart. I'll go backwards from the way I put it together, and we'll look inside and see what it looks like. Just at a glance, it's definitely firmed up, and I'm thinking we might want to seal the top, but I'll look and see. It's going to be fun to look in there and see. All right, well, I have to be completely honest, this didn't go as well as I'd hoped. The finish just doesn't look as nice as I'd hoped it would. It sort of spalled and broke off a little bit where I had that trim strip. The trim strip did a decent job of kind of creating an interface between the cinder block and the concrete, but it broke off, and you can see on this, there's a lot that is pretty stuck on there. And you know, I had release on there, I had some oil on there, and I think I could probably bevel that trim strip and maybe get a little bit better results. I think the biggest problem here was the admixture of the plasticizer. And there may be a good case for that. I don't know quite what that is. If I ever do something like this again, I would build just a little tiny test piece and try all those mixtures on a test piece before I committed to doing a whole thing like this. It's a little bit challenging pouring, mixing, and kind of keeping everything going, vibrating and stuff when I'm doing it myself. So maybe having somebody help may have got it a little bit better consolidated. But I'm not worried about this being structurally sound. It's super flat. It's in the exact shape it needs to be, and it's anchored the posts really well, and I've got all the rebar and everything in there. So it's going to be, you know, for a water pedestal, it's going to work just fine. I'd love to show you a perfect success and just flawless artistry, but it's not that. I'm learning as I go. And I'm not going to put a cap like this on the foundations I do elsewhere, because the building goes on top of it. This is going to be exposed, and that's why I put this cap on it the way I did. I've got my brackets in there. The next step is to put up the canopy. The canopy's out of wood, and that should go up fairly quickly. There's not a ton of pieces to that. It's just it's a lightweight structure, but it's going to have a metal roof that will shade. And I did measure when I was doing this, so I didn't make that mistake. The tank will fit in here. I'll slide that in once I get it done. And I need to fill this whole thing in with some of that concrete that I've got, and then I'll get some gravel as well. I want that something that doesn't compact over time so that the tank can stay level. And I'll sort of put that in lifts and then compress it with a vibrating plate. That won't be very exciting. I'll just dump it in as I go, and it'll be a few yards of gravel in here along with all the concrete that I've salvaged from the fence posts. So thanks for watching. I would love to always show just beautiful stuff. This time you see me learning, and I think you always see me learning when I do this stuff. Learned a lot. I'm glad this was a test, kind of a small project that will probably really rarely be seen, but it will serve its purpose well and will benefit from the water every time. Until I see you next, I'll be out building. I'm gonna clean up here and head on home and come back out next time and put up the canopy. Thanks for watching.